All right. And that's on. Okay, how robust apps are made, right? The cloud. Okay, we're all done, sorry. No, just kidding. You can put junk in the cloud too. I've done it. The cloud is just somebody else's computer. But anyways, how robust apps are made, real quick definition of what that is. It's not fragile. It handles problems gracefully. Consistent user experience means it's intuitive, easy to learn, and then maintainable, easy to change. You know, it's in a way that you can then add, you can morph it to business needs and things like that. So that's kind of my definition of a robust application. So let me tell you this case of this curious kid. Found computers fascinating. Loved them. Loved taking away some words in a text document. The computer did magic. Learned about how all the things worked for that computer, you know, all networking, all this stuff, how did it all interconnect, right? Got a job doing that. Oh my gosh, I get paid to do my hobby. That's so cool. So doing work for a few years, doing more and more complex things, then things start, you know, it takes pride in making things better for people, better in their work, better in their lives, and then things start breaking and gets called in late at night, weekends, right at the worst time for business, you know, and then soon just putting out fires, right? So you got all this code out there. It works really cool when it works, but then most of the time it's putting out fires. And instead of, oh, I just screwed that up. I need to go into this window and scroll in there. So basically put out fires, couldn't make new and better things, right? So this curious kid was me. Data center in a bank. So along the way, mistakes were made. I want to share those experiences with some of you. So hopefully maybe we can all cry in the corner together, or we can say, oh, that's a good idea. Maybe I won't go down that dark path, you know. I want to mean something, you know, makes my past a little more worth it. I geared the discussion not just for software developers, but really more towards people that do everything. I really consider myself a jack of all trades. And so I see things from lots of different angles, and writing code is kind of what I do. Well, I do a lot of other stuff too. But the discussion is also used for people that don't really write code. People like a server administrator or an app admin, right? You kind of don't know what those guys are doing over there, right? They're doing stuff and they hand you over junk and it breaks, and you're like, what are you guys doing over there to make this better so I don't have to come in, you know, a server admin or something. So I want to kind of point out some of the things that software people could be doing or should be doing to help make, you know, administrators and things like that actually not have to be called in too. And basically, even if you're using the cloud, you can still put fragile stuff in there. So it's not, I've always found that the tools don't seem to solve problems. They just amplify problems, and you have to have processes and things to make them better. So, you know, so if you're here, you got cloud stuff, you're doing 4 nines, you want to go to 5 nines, forget it. I just want 2 nines, you know, so. But let me introduce myself. Gary Scott. I've been doing web app stuff for about 20 years now. So like the first couple years of the web, I actually hopped into it. Probably done about 24 programming languages. I do things like gather requirements and grok business needs and architect systems. I do struggle with CSS and public speaking. I've done information technology and intrusion detection at a bank. That was kind of interesting. Really made me want to hide under here. There's crazy stuff going on out there. And I've done things like written learning management systems from scratch, not even using a database before they were called learning management systems. I've also racked servers. I've also run rm-rs/ as root. If anybody knows, that means everything on a Linux server. Copy paste error. Did that in one of my early days. I need to restore. What do you need to restore? Everything. Let's see. I love user experience. I love process improvement. I love cats. I hate fighting fires. My venture buddy and I, my wife, we look at California historical landmarks. There's a list out there. I love checking out the list. There's over 1,000 of them. We've seen over 400. Actually, we saw 32 on the way up here from Santa Barbara. We spent 3 days, a whole weekend, coming and do it. There's one right near here, number 804. It's just west of here. It was, it's called a Wolfskill Grant. It was 100 acres that was given to University of California back in the 30s, I believe, and I think it's part of A&R. So that's one that's right near here. And the next one. So here's my topics. We already got 2 down. There's a lot more little topics I could cover. We could always go on forever. I'm going to kind of stop at each one and kind of also see if I can get somebody to kind of give their little 2 cents as well. Let's see. Let's wait and pause it for each one. Some real quick ones, right? Don't use spaces. Make everything lowercase. Practice read-only Fridays. Okay, environments. This one is probably one of my favorites. So many places I go into, they just have production and they just maybe have a limited test environment. And I found that over the years that the more and more isolated I get my test environment, the more robust my app can be because I can exercise it fully. And one of the last things for me was email. Email was always a thing. My app sends email. Well, I worked on an online banking application. I was working on notifications. About 3 days later, I discovered I was seeing notifications to actual real customers. So the trick was that we just did a update all for the database to update all to my email address in our test system. So, but one thing to think about with this is like for tests, right? We all know production, no problem. Maybe at least have a test, at least have 2, and try to make it as close as possible. And think about what I would call read systems and read-write systems, right? So you want to isolate your write systems. Anything you're going to write data to, a database, email is a write system, right? Because you're writing out to the world. But you don't need to really replicate things like Active Directory or LDAP, right? You're going to read, well, unless you're LDAP application. If you're going to read like from a directory, right? Say I log in with my Windows account into a system and it goes looks at a group. I don't see a reason why you have to have like a test version of that because you're just going to read and get permissions. And then maybe your app says, oh, well, if it's Gary, then give him super admin or give him, you know, this other person. So write systems, I believe, are kind of okay for test systems, but or read systems. But then anything writable, if you isolate it and you make like your own mail server that accepts email and everything, then you can fully exercise that app. You can touch every corner of it and you can find every little weird obscure bug. I came into a workplace once and they said, oh, just test the app here and test, but don't go farther than this button because that button sends the email right to the database. And, well, that's exactly what I want to make sure that works. So anybody got an environment, test environment, kind of anything they want to share about stuff like this where it's maybe have saved you or?
We have a test environment and our apps like to bump up the requirements for like PHP or whatnots. And not tell us when they hand it over. So it gets into production and it completely fails because the versions mismatch. We got better communicating.
So that's probably falls along the lines of like what do we call DevOps, right? Where you got developers working of operations and stuff. And what I like to do is I have my server admins, like we run .NET. And the server admins say, well, do I update the version of .NET? I'm like, no. Patches, all this stuff you want to do. If I'm 4.7.1, please leave it there because my code kind of lines up with that. But then what we do is at some point we say, okay, we're going to go to the next version, 4.7.2, and then we will actually kind of schedule an update in production and test, or test into production. And usually we'll do like a week maybe. But they're like, when we're ready to go, we say we're going to do a test, and like prod is already ready. It's like if it works fine, we smoke test the app, it's fine. We're going to do production a few days later or a couple days later, and that way we're really close because that's what happens. Even though they might have done it like 6 months ago, right? And say, oh yeah, we totally forgot. We didn't mean to do production. And then you run into this. So I ran into a .NET Core issue like that too, because the 2.0 to 2.1 seemed to be a little funky. So yeah, so really keep them close together, but try to keep it even time close together. So
yeah, not to say we're using new features.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't. Well, I had to move production up.
Yep. Fix it forward. Is that terminology instead of rollback? Okay, here's another one. Modern tools and techniques. And especially in the even web world and all this stuff, things really changed in the last couple of years. Or at least we're catching up to what there should be, like single page applications. But anyways, if you use modern tools and techniques, vendors support it. You know, if you're say a vendor application, you're a couple versions back, they might not support it anymore. It might be kind of wonky. It might work in an old browser. Lots of common knowledge out there. If you use some stuff that's kind of common and modern, then you go to Stack Overflow and I got this problem. I got this error message. There's probably 20 Stack Overflow things on there, or Google or whatever, to find out. So it's like you're not alone if you're using kind of more common tools out there, No, I say same thing. Also, online help. There seems to be a lot of things are moving more towards open source, or things like Drupal being used, or React, or JSON for web services and things like that. And there just seems to be so much out there. If you kind of stay, I'm not a bleeding edge person. I always like to be like a notch back, and that way things kind of work okay. Because I remember early days of the web, if you're doing the bleeding edge stuff, like I want my screen to like roll around, and it's like, well, that works in Internet Explorer 4, but it doesn't work in this thing, and it was all fragile, and then it would always break all the time. So I said, oh, I'm going to go ratchet one back. It may not be super flashy, but damn, that web page just worked forever. I didn't go mess with it. So I'm not about a bleeding edge, but I believe just keep up to date, keep current. If you just sit there and lag something for 5-10 years, all of a sudden the world changes around you and your stuff isn't going to work anymore. And then you're putting out fires all of a sudden because, oh my gosh, they took out this feature of this browser, You save time and money because, again, you're not trying to fight fires and all that kind of stuff. And also security is baked in too. I'll use the .NET example, is even PHP. It is built, SQL injection and cross-site scripting is like built into those frameworks now. So if you use like an older version, then those vulnerabilities will get through. I mean, years ago, I tried to demo a SQL injection with using PHP, and I had to jump through 20 hoops to get a SQL injection to get through the PHP engine to actually show it and execute it. So it was really nice because those things are built-in protection for that kind of stuff. So any other tips on where people have moved to new technology or whatever, or finding where to help them out? Come on in. As you can see, my good example, they're digging a ditch or using a ditch witch. Code separation. So what this is kind of about is, there's a couple things with this one, is like, you got these monolithic apps that do everything, and it's easy, right? You just go into the place and you just start writing code and everything you want. And then, you might have some business logic or something that might need to be reused in another place. If you put everything in, say, a web application, well, maybe you want to do it in a desktop application or a web application, and then you copy paste that code to other places, copy and paste that code, that logic, maybe in different languages. You introduce places where, oh, well, there's a bug now. And so you go fix it. Well, you fix it in one place, but not multiple places. So if you separate that code into libraries, you isolate it. It does one thing really well. That's like actually, I think, a Unix motto. Do one thing really well. An add function only adds. And then you can set it over here. You can lock it down. You can test it. It's good. My manager once told me old code is stable code. So it kind of goes against modern technology, but it probably works okay if you get it in there and settled. So then it allows you to reuse the code. You can then you can make it so it can be testable. Because you isolated, you might have like one interface into it and one exit. So like an add function, you say, okay, you do one thing and that's it. You don't go modify state. You don't talk to a database and things like that. So this is something that I've been practicing more and more. My coworkers have been really good at creating all these little libraries for all these different things, even utility functions like strings and time and things. And then we have all these helper functions, especially with boilerplate code, where we'll wrap it up in a function and separate it all out, and then all our apps can pull it all in. And so that's starting to work pretty well for us. And it's a thing that will help make things, again, the main thing for robustness is that you can, if you have a bug to fix, you fix it in one place and not 100 different places. So anybody write code and then have it all in a monolithic application or found a use for things like doing this, separating it out? What kind of languages who writes code in this room? Who raise their hands? They got about half. So like, are we doing Python, Node? What about like .NET, my current favorite? PHP, that was my favorite before I went to .NET, but now I hate .NET and I want to go to JavaScript and Node. So give it about 3 years, I start cursing it. So,
well, like in a lot of frameworks now, they're doing things like dependency injection containers and focusing on building things that are services, things like that can be used that way. That's it. You know what I mean? And it makes a huge difference in that.
Yeah, dependency injection is it's still kind of new for me since I'm a jack of all trades. But the cool thing about that, if you don't know what that means, is instead of your code saying, oh, I talked to this database, Well, now the problem is, what if you want to test that isolated from the database? Well, it's hard linked to that. So dependency injection means, hey, I'm some app. I'm going to hand you the thing that you're going to talk to. I'm going to inject the dependency that you need, and then you're going to do it. So then for like a test system, you could just swap that out for either a mock interface or a test database or whatever else you want. And that really allows you to separate the code out from the implementations and things. Also, say a thing like a database could be, it might just be interface like save. You know, that's the method you pass in, and you don't care where it gets saved to. And then down the road, you can change the database underneath the hood or something like that. So, oh, for .NET stuff, definitely, if you haven't explored NuGet, I love it. So, you know, you got the NuGet out there, we get code from, but you can package your own code. And so we have .NET stuff. We package it into NuGet packages. We throw it on our own NuGet server. It's in-house. There's free open source ones out there. We go to Visual Studio. We point to our repo. We pull down that code. We get the version stuff. We got pre-releases. That thing has really kind of helped. I talk about a build server a little bit later. So that was actually very useful for being able to reuse code and distribute it to these other applications. So, okay, testing. I hate testing. I still cannot get into it. You know, I make it work and I run away. And for those of you who don't know about testing, these are basically, there's unit testing and there's something called integration testing. And unit testing is testing something like an add method. It only does one little thing. It's a tight little unit. Talking to an external database or email, something like that's called integration testing. Is a little trickier because that other system might not be set up correctly. Like you talk to a database, you might query it for some data. Well, if the data's not there, you're testing. So this over here is the typical a unit test will have kind of 3 different parts to it. And you have a range, act, and assert. And the unit test is just more code that runs your code. And the idea is you want your test to be very simple, like more simple, because you want to be able to, how do you test your test, right? So you want to be able to look at it and actually see what you're really doing. And then when you write your unit test, you actually break them up, and each one does one little tiny thing. And so you might have one method that does one thing, but you might have 15 tests for it because you're going to test it from every single little angle, right? So you see in my example here, I have 2 variables in let, right? That's my script. 2 and 5. And then my act is I have an add method. I'm passing in those 2 variables, and I'm getting back a result. This is actually called functional programming, where all it does is take an input and gives you an output. And then, so that's actually testing the method. So you're acting upon it. And then you assert it, which means you check if it's actually valid or not. And so typically you check your output, which is z here is equal to, or 7 is equal to z. That's called a Yoda notation, where you do the variables backwards. So it is, hopefully, in my department, I try to make that a code standard. So instead of blah equals null, you say null equals blah. Anyways, this is kind of funny. So basically, you can see this is a valid test to see if the add method actually does add. And I would say probably about once or twice a year, these things save me, because I'll have the test up and I'll go change something that I don't think will cause a problem, and then I'll run the sucker and I'll get some red ones. And I'm like, oh, I didn't think it was going to do that. I go and change it or whatever. Usually those are the more complex methods. But, so this right here is a test runner in Visual Studio. I think this is actually ReSharper's test, but the Visual Studio one is the same. As you can see, each one of these little nodes, they all have different names. And you put the name, you do, the naming convention is kind of usually you do like what you're doing, what the operation is, and what the result is. And so you can see if it's got errors or not. So that's just a neat little screenshot for testing. So anybody here use testing for anything, for any of their code, or more than just a person tapping at the screen to make sure it looks good in their browser?
Yeah, we use Circle CI.
So we're going to talk about Team Cities, what we use, but that's one we hopped into. So you write
Ruby shop, so.
Ruby shop, and then you just have your test, and it runs it when it builds the code and stuff. Yeah.
Yep, we have one commit. We have commit hooks.
You're more advanced than we are.
We have a React Native app, and we do unit tests for our UI just to make sure that when someone adds a new feature, doesn't create UI for the rest of the app.
What do you use to test the UI?
It's called Enzyme. It's just really specific to React, but it'll basically take a snapshot of your DOM that your code will generate, and then it'll save that and conversion control that, you commit that, and then when you run a new test, it'll compare it against your old snapshot, and if it's different, then it'll fail your test.
Is it like an open source or is it a vendor product?
No, it's open source.
Is it all React or just React Native?
I think it's React. All React.
Yeah, so I'm getting into React, so I want that kind of stuff.
Enzyme?
Enzyme. UIs are tough to test, you know, because it's like it's meant for a human to interact with it. But luckily, web applications are a little easier because you have the DOM, which is the HTML page and all that stuff. You can say, oh, is this button say this? But a lot of times, like I've used Selenium before, but then you got to have that run in your browser, and it actually does things, and so you can't really run them automatically.
Yeah, we run that on with CI. So when we have a Git commit hook, and then it'll run it all there.
Cool.
Fails won't build.
Cool.
Use BHAT. You can use a Selenium engine to do
BHAT. Behind.
Yeah, we use Capybara, Gem. Same thing.
I know, and so it's cool because a lot of stuff is open source now.
Yeah.
And years ago, it was just, you know, it was, I don't know, you had to pay tens of thousands of dollars for this stuff, and it was junk. So, because I remember doing UI stuff where I had to actually like click on things, say record what I'm doing, and I'd click around and it would record it, and then it would just play it back. So, oh yeah, your browser, oh yeah, it was such a nightmare. Okay, how am I doing on time? 120, perfect. Okay, halfway through. Source code, my favorite subject. Don't do this. I did this up to a couple years ago. Right, 15 plus years of writing code. This was my thing. Maybe I zipped it up if I was real happy, you know. So, you know, source control is just, right, code, all this stuff is just text files. It's all it is. That's the magic of it. And source control does a couple things. It just kind of takes that, it will version it. I've never really gone back and looked at the history of code, but the idea is, you know, say, oh, I got this history. I can go back and see when this bug, all this stuff, right? For me, it is the code I have here in front of me, is this legit? Is this valid? Is this the code I looked at 2 days ago? Because, you know, in the old days when I did this, it was on a file server somewhere. Oh, the file server's backed up. Cool, done. So version control, right? Mm-hmm. But, you know, somebody else goes in there in one of these folders and messes some file up. You know, maybe I messed a file up. I've had that before where I've loaded up Visual Studio, for example, or you know, PHP Storm or whatever, and some reason it tweaks some little file. I didn't realize it, or I hit a carriage turn. So there's some little bug now floating around because there's a missing semicolon. It's deep in some other code somewhere. So a version control system, a lot of times you load up that code and you'll say, oh, these things have changed. And you're like, I didn't mean for that to change. And then you click one thing and it reverts it back to the last good copy. So let me go over my actual notes here. So basically, yeah, I did this even a couple years ago. Really got into Git. I'll show Git next. I had version control previously at the bank I worked at, but it was a piece of junk, ClearCase, if anybody's worked with it. I've also done TFS and Mercurial, which is more like Git. But old version control systems were just junk. They were based on folder-based, all this stuff, but the new generation is amazing. Things like Git is more of a, I mean, I say Git, you can use anything you want, but Git is 90% because it's really good. And it's complicated, but you only need like 10% of the features to get what you need done. So I'll talk about that. So basically, it's you know, Git is a program that runs on your computer. It just lives in a folder, and it looks at those files and keeps track of them for you. And you know, people have heard of GitHub and other services like GitLab or Bitbucket, and they're not interchangeable. This is the software tool, and it is command line. It is API based, but there's probably 1,000 GUIs out there. I know of at least 4 or 5 that are free and or open source for Mac and Linux and Windows. And it took me a couple years to make the shift, but anytime I do any kind of new code, even if I'm playing around, because a lot of times I'll go and do some stuff and I can't figure it out, and I will say, you know what, I'm going to go over here and build a little playground app real quick to test out this what I'm thinking about doing. And even then, I will get Ignit and I'll make a Git repo, because what happens is, it happens all the time, is I play around for 20 minutes and I go, hey, it works pretty good, but you know what, I think I'm going to refactor it again. I can make it a little bit better. And then I start down that little refactoring, and then it's like, oh man, I totally screwed it all up. I wish I had the code I had 10 minutes ago. And then forget it. It's like, oh, what did I do? What did I do? Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control C, right? Undo. So what I'll do is I'll write a little bit of code in my little folder on my little laptop here, and I'll say, looks pretty good, git commit, save it. And it saves it out. And then I play it a little more. Okay, this is what I want to do. I can just roll back to that last git commit. So that's even just using it ad hocly on like my laptop or something, not even outside of like using a big source control system. So, and my favorite feature, like I mentioned, is when some file gets messed up, it can tell me right away, because I go and it gives me what's called a git diff, and it says, hey, there's a change. You want to commit that? Because it thinks it's fine. But I go, no, I didn't mean to change that file. And then I can just say revert changes, and it comes back, and it's good to go. So source control is good. I mean, anybody write any kind of code for production or even playing around, definitely look at this, because there's lynda.com videos, there's a lot of YouTube videos on the basics of it. I can go on and on about this. The basic for me of Git is snapshots in time. It's just a stream of snapshots of time. And then a branch is an alternate reality. So you're going down this way and you branch off, and then you make an alternate reality and you do something else, and you might merge that back in. So that's like my Git, easy. It works good. You can use it now for code. You can use it for text files. We actually have a change log that we keep in Git. And the reason why is we want to see the history of what changed of that change log. And so when we make a new release, we make our notes in there, we make our changes, we link to our different repos, and then you can see who made that change, what happened. But then at the end of the day, we have a single text file that lists out all the changes and stuff. So instead of being like it would have been a Word document sitting in a file share somewhere, but then we don't have really good visible change management on that document. So
My notes for this are in Git.
there you go. So do you use Gist? Have you seen that?
Yeah, I don't use Gists too often.
It's a very simplified version of like a GitHub. On GitHub, it's a GitHub thing, and there's like Git repos, and Gist is like if you just want to keep little text files and things like that. But,
Yeah.
but really for Git, it's no database, there's no client server. It actually lives in the folder. There's a little .git folder. It's this little database in there, and it lives in that folder. So you can zip that folder up and put it somewhere else, and you have your full source code repository. So it's really cool. Anybody else have any source control nightmares or aha stories or?
Subversion sucks. Don't use it.
Yep.
RCS is still viable.
There's a lot of old ones out there that are like CVS was like the old classic for a long time.
It's a little newer than RCS. Yeah. CVS is still better than Subversion. Mercurial, good. Git, good.
Mercurial was the first one I used that was like this. It's called distributed.
Yep. And
it was very similar, almost exactly the same as this, but Git kind of took over. Git was created by Linus Torvalds, which is who created the Linux kernel. So, and I mean, it's big in the Windows world too. Microsoft actually contributed a lot of code to the Windows library for Git. So it works really well in Windows. And then of course, Microsoft just bought GitHub, which is one of the major providers. So we have our organization, we have 120 repos or so in GitHub. That's where we keep our code.
Same.
All private. We have like 2 public repos, but
We have a bunch of public, but yeah.
yeah, it's just so easy to use, and everybody else uses it. So again, it's a common modern tool, and we can go out and find out how people use it. And there's a lot of talk on GitHub and stuff. So, okay, moving on. It's kind of hot in here. Of course, I have 2 shirts on. Version numbers. Okay, so you're a one-woman, one-man shop, and you're tweaking code, and you throw it out there on the web server, and that was I did today. And then you put another one out there. You have no idea what's in your file system here in your good new copy final folder and what's on the server. You might know because it's just you, but then somebody else, you're out sick, you hit by a bus, right? Somebody else comes in, they're not quite sure what's going on here. I've got 3 versions of the code, which is a good copy. I've been in a situation. What I've done is I've taken the production version and I brought that back in and said, I know this works. I'm gonna put this in. Phone banking application, that was my favorite. I'll bring it all back from production because I have no idea what this mess is. And at least we can start from a good working point, so we knew when we push forward, it was gonna work okay. So even if you're a single person shop and you write some code, just stamp it. Just like, okay, this is what I'm gonna put out there today. And then you put the date. I love dates for version numbers. Do the cool SIMVer, right? 18, 8, what, 16, you know, right? That's like the date format. Anyways, you can say version 1, version 2. The idea is you want to be able to like redeploy it later. Or like say the server crashes, you know, I'm talking about old school, I'm not talking about cloud stuff, right? But you got to rebuild it. It's like, what version was out there before? Oh, we had version 2 out there. Okay, cool. Oh, now we have it zipped up over here. We can put it back out there. You kind of know what it is. And it goes all holistic, right? Because your code, you might have multiple files, might be compiled, it might be libphp, right? Just lives all in a folder. But all that together has to work together. So you can't just change out 1 or 2 files here, right? You've got to kind of keep it all together. So you say, cool, this is my thing. Even if you take your folder and zip it up and say, this is v1, and you stick it in the file server and it gets backed up, cool. Now you've got a version 1. Let's work on a version 2.
There are some shops that they're using Git, they'll just use a Git commit hash as a version.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it works too well because it's just random string.
So and then with Git, they have a thing called tags.
Tags.
And all a tag is a friendly name pointing to one of the, right, because Git uses these hashes, right? And so that every single commit has its hash on there and it's kind of unfriendly name. But a tag will say, and you just tag it v1. GitHub itself has a release feature, which is not part of Git, but is part of GitHub. And they use, that's a tag, v1 SMTP. I wrote that, I created that. It points to this hash in the code, which is that point in time. So at that point in time, I said, this is it. This is working. This is a good copy. I stamped it. I used the release feature in GitHub, and I put some notes about it. And oh, I compiled it because it's a .NET application that runs on Windows. I compiled it and threw the compiled one in this release. So this is GitHub though, right? You can release it however you want, but I had source code and then I had my runnable version I threw in here. But I did stamp it. I mean, this is like a little tester tool because I would say, hey, I need to talk to the mail server. And the firewall guy's, okay, we got it open. And I go, okay, man, I'm just gonna try to send an email. Nothing happens. Well, what the heck happened? Did the app fail? Did the net, what happened? So I wrote this little program I could run on the server and say, I can't talk to the mail server, so I guess your network isn't right. Because they always say you blame the firewall. And I said, well, this is always the problem. So like this is just a little program I wrote. I had 10 lines of code. I versioned it. And so now people can go in my group and say, go get that. And instead of trying to find the code in some weird file server, they just get that executable and they're good to go. And there's version 1 and version 2, and version 2 has some bugs in it. Version 1 worked okay, but version 3, I had some features that were kind of cool. Like you can change the from address. So. Next. Oh, anyway, so releases, version control. Anybody have any good stories or say, oh no, you're stupid, Gary. That's like, forget it. Go, please.
So we use the releases to keep track of like what's been implemented for each release, and we use the release notes.
That's kind of what this is. This part here was like a release notes. Oh no, that one. Anyways, you can type a bunch of text in there.
And then whenever we are publishing a new release, then we can do like a blog post and we can point it to this page and everybody can see what the changes were. It's just really helpful.
Yeah, and it was nice as you can even reference, well, even with GitHub, for example, you can do like the markdown code that you put pound, whatever, you can reference like issues and things like that and say, it fixed this issue, and so somebody might care about it. I was talking about that changelog in Git. What we do is we found that we started having like, once we had this shared code, we had like an API and an admin app and a public web app and a newer public web app, and they all use the same code. So a lot of times we actually had to release like all 4 of them at the same time because we had a database change because we're using old technology, right? So, and it was like, okay, what am I going to release this Thursday? Because not Friday. And Thursday morning was the last chance we get because we're slow in the morning because we have students and they're up doing stuff at 10 o'clock at night. So please don't upgrade the database server at 7 p.m. because that is our busiest time. So Thursday morning, it's like, okay, well, I got 4 apps to release. And it was all this, which versions of whatever. I said, hey, let's just make a single changelog. We make releases for all the different apps. And then that changelog just references those releases. And so it says, the change is for this day. And then we got the releases here that we put to. And so it's nice is because I was copy and pasting this stuff all over the place. It was like, I have these release notes. They're in the release. And then they're in this changelog document over here. And then it's in the change management thing over here. And I'm like, boss, I'm copying and pasting the same text in all these different places. And no, we changed that. So now I'm going to go change it to different places. Can we just have one place you look at and then that links to the other places? And I describe what I need to be done here. Yay, she says. So automated build and deploy. So now we're getting kind of sketchy land. for like the do-it-yourselfers. But and this is fairly new for me. Again, we've only had our build server for a couple years now, and oh my gosh, that thing has paid for itself. And basically, so build and deploy, aka robots doing work for you. So lots of different names: continuous integration, continuous deployment, build servers, right? That cloud's kind of cool for continuous integration, but for me, it's like I talk about my libraries, and we put the code in a GitHub repo, and we tell the build server, watch this GitHub repo and watch the master branch. And when there's new code in master, compile the code, run the test, copy it out to the new Git server. So I sit there and I push my library code, and I wait about 30 seconds. I come over here and I load up the project, and I go to NuGet, and by the time I do all that, the library's there. And it's like, cool, I can import that in and use it. So the manual step for that was probably 5 minutes and the old was a GUI tool, the old way to do it. And you had to open this GUI tool, copy your files in there, and save it out and name it. Visual Studio does now have a checkbox now that builds a NuGet package. But now the robot, we wrote it once in the code, and it doesn't change. It's a maintained task. It does it over and over again. Another cool thing is we have it deployed to our test servers. We don't have to do anything in production yet. But we have one test server. It's kind of it's a good test, so it's a staging server. It's really for UAT kind of thing. It's by the time it gets there, it's in really good state. It will build, compile, and actually deploy to that web server. So again, that's another step that was, okay, Visual Studio, I'm all good. I have to go say build, release, publish, do whatever credentials, file, map, drive, all this stuff. And again, error prone because it was like five steps. I might have missed something. We scripted out once. It does break once in a while. We have to go in and tweak it because maybe a version changed and the build server doesn't have that version, and it complains at us. It says, oh, I couldn't build that. I was like, oh, I'm sorry. And of course it says Gary broke the build. And but we set it up, and it's like, I just last week I was in there, and it's like, okay, cool. I'm gonna get stuff to the test server, and for the web apps we go to a develop branch. And so it's like literally I just go, I wonder if the test is building today. I go to the web page for the test server, for the build server. It shows it building. Okay, I guess it's not going to break. And it's like I said to sit there for a couple minutes and take my little break, and then it's like, oh, it's up on the test server now. Hey, user, go to this URL, check it out. And that would have been 5 to 10 minute process to build the code and push it out to the server. And this thing did it all for me. And like I said, we're using TeamCity by JetBrains. They also make some other cool little products. There's lots of these things out there. We do it on-prem because it has databases on it and all this other stuff. But you can get ones in the cloud too. We pay it. They have an education discount for like 50% off. It's pretty cool. It's like $1,000 a year. We pay for TeamCity. That thing pays for itself in a month of our time. So I can go get coffee instead of like doing this work. But it's about the repeating task, the manual task that you might screw up. Look into one of these things to kind of at least help. You can start small and work out bigger. So. Anybody have experience with using? We talked Circle CI.
We also have a Jenkins on-prem.
Jenkins is one of the first ones I've seen. It's we got back there. What?
I worked here at UCCSC. I just started, and as far as I know, we're using Bitbucket as our source code repo, and that has a feature built in called Bitbucket Pipeline, which eliminates the need for Jenkins. To some extent, I don't have much experience. So that's what we're using. I love it. So is my teammate. And when we introduce a new person to our code base, we already have these robots set up, and so it would test his code when he check it in and let him know automatically. Kind of like once we set it up on one project, we could almost automatically
copy it to the next, because they all do the same kind of thing, right? So
yeah, to some extent. So I love it.
And what's nice is it was easy to get them up and running instead of saying, oh, we have to, you have to know how to do this, and this to get it even out to where we can look at it. Right? Say, hey, just commit your code to this branch and you're good.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And commit like you already know how to do.
Yeah.
You have stuff that will do stuff.
Yeah. Is Pipelines a paid product?
I actually don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but when I joined, it was available.
I know on GitLab it's free to an extent.
GitLab's interesting because it's free for educational for their private repos, and they're like gold, but it's only one license to a campus. So if you're like at a library and you go to GitLab and say, hey, can you have a license? They say, no, like one per campus, period. So that's kind of the drawback there. Otherwise, it's like $500.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, GitHub started introducing stuff too. A lot, it's moving more and more. There's dedicated products. A lot of these code repositories have stuff in there, and so they're becoming more and more prevalent, and they're really kind of cool, you know, because it's. I mean, if the basics, you could write a shell script that helps you do things. I mean, that's the basic build deploy. You know, it's like,
Makefile.
you know, what
Makefile.
a makefile. So I never just looked at those, but that's. I know.
Side.
I know.
Come
I
to the
was
side.
no. I started BSD Linux because it was all free, right? So I did everything at home and it was all free and stuff. But
Come back to the dark side.
but
We miss you.
I'm getting there. You know, I can't run my Node stuff really well in Windows. So
For Drupal people, I could recommend Provo .ci is a good tool for.
We are very good answers, but we are experimenting with Bamboo. And
Yeah.
this guy integrated very well with .NET Client. So just checking the code in Studio, everything that's automated. I'm waiting for script because so when you need, we don't work with incorporating SQL scripts, something.
Yeah.
We are deploying against so we're just testing right now. We don't have anything in production.
that's good.
We are just experimenting with it.
I love competition because, like I said, there's literally right now there's probably 20 different things out there, and they all do different levels. And some are like Team City was a free version, and it was like we had it for about a year with the free version. But then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, this thing really works. We want to get more than the number of build, because they gave you like a little like, hey, you get free build configurations, you know. So
But that's really the pipeline. I mean, we are only invested in this. So we just have to.
And there's one thing I remember when you were asked if it was included or not, is that I don't know what kind of account I have, but there's a limit to the amount of work hours that can be, job hours that can be done in a month. And I think it's some number that we hit, and we're not even doing it. So
that's cool.
15 minutes a month. That seems kind of low, but it was something low.
I think it's 500.
500 minutes. So like,
So we also run all the Elastic too. Run Bamboo and Bitbucket for that. We are looking at the Elastic doesn't have Bamboo in the cloud, but it's pipeline on the cloud. We try that in the build. It's not free. It's
yeah, the cloud. I mean, on server on-prem, you're running because you got to compile the code and run it, right? But in the cloud, you're going to pay for compute cycles for like any other cloud thing. So, you know, we run it on-prem, so it's like on our own hardware. But that's something to think about too. But again, a lot of these things provide. You might be a little shop and you only use like a margin of what it is. I have 4 minutes left. A couple topics to cover. Persistence is a really short one, basically. Persistence is my take is I hate relational databases. Let's move on. Anyways, right, apps are code in memory. It's RAM, it's volatile. I want to save it, and I want to get it back later. As a developer, that's all I care about. Relational databases are tables and rows and columns, and they're meant for ledgers. It's such a pain. If you're using a relational database, use like an object relational management, like an ORM. At least do that so you don't write boilerplate code, but try to look at something like NoSQL, try to re-architect your app. Everything I do is still in SQL Server. But anyways, there are a lot of things that go wrong. One thing, you write to the database, 20 things can go wrong, right? Check for those things, you know? Don't just save it and blindly and then throw the exception to the user and say, blah. You know, try to say, hey, did it actually save okay? Was any errors? Try to have some a lot of things can go wrong talking to a database. That's what I have to say about that. Logging and alerting. This saves me daily. Started putting logging into our applications. All we did was log to .NET, log to the event viewer. I don't like it anymore. Talk to Splunk. Splunk alerted us. It worked. I don't like it anymore. But anyways, don't rely upon the customer early alert system. Have your thing. If you have an exception, I have a thing where it alerts me if it's a fatal error. And a fatal error is the user got a blah, I can't do anything. There might be some errors I can recover from. And maybe I say, hey, there's a problem right now, or maybe the code can actually take another path. But a lot of times it's some catastrophic error, like database is down because they upgraded at 7 p.m. at night. But just even if you go to like text files, that's okay. But at least if they say, hey, something went wrong, at least you can go back and see what happened, or you can try to do it and see what happens. So that really helps you try to figure out what's going on in production because you can't see into the code. So I think I have like 2 minutes. Planning and assessment, basically hours of work, save minutes planning. Oops, there's my, I'm sorry. there is a Google Cloud Stack on that side. This is actually a real one. This is a Splunk. This is actually just dumps me the exception. But it actually said, oh, I couldn't talk to the database. So it was kind of cool. Planning assessment, hours of work, saves minutes planning.
Yeah.
Just take a couple seconds, look at something. I'm out of time, but 1 minute left. Basically, the story is the user came, said, this bug is major. We need to fix it right now. We say, well, how long has the bug been there? You know, my big boss does. I look at it, go, it's been there for at least 2 years. And so it's like, maybe we should actually go through the next release cycle and not just have an emergency fix. So my real fix would have broke something. So I got somebody take a picture of my wonderful quote. So take a couple seconds, look around before you jump in and try to fix it because it might be worse than what you thought of. So I'm done. No more reason for fragile apps. Only the happy path is handled, not all the problems. Stay curious. Thank you much.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Bye.
Well, we used to use Bamboo too. We used to a lot of the last stuff like Stash. You remember that one?
That was Atlassian, right?
But